Welcome to An Honorable Profession, a podcast giving America hope since 2018. I'm Ryan Coonerty. Along with Debbie Cox Bultan of the New Deal, I'm lucky enough to be your co-host. An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. The New Deal is an organization that supports the next generation of American leaders. From attorneys generals, to state senators, to mayors, to school board members, these are the people that are pushing policies and politics that will respond to climate change, rebuild our economy, address racial injustice, and restore our democracy. These are incredibly talented people who have dedicated themselves to public service when their country and their communities needed it the most. Check out newdealleaders.org to see what I'm talking about.
In the newest installment in our How Government Can Get Shit Done series, I talk with Caitlin Lewis, Executive Director of Work for America, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit initiative tackling the government staffing crisis in communities nationwide. Caitlin and I talk about the factors that have led to a shortage of government workers around the country and how we can address it, including what advice she has for state and local leaders and hiring managers on how to recruit and retain top-notch talent. We also talk about the impacts of DOJ's mass layoffs and how her organization's Civic Match program is helping connect thousands of former federal workers with new job opportunities in state and local government, bringing talented public servants to communities in need of their skills and expertise. I appreciated Caitlin's thoughtfulness about how we can change the public image of government service and why that's important for democracy, as well as her hope that in this moment, we might be able to shine a light on the talented, innovative people who are working to make government more efficient, responsive, and effective. I hope you enjoy. All right, Caitlin Lewis, welcome to An Honorable Profession.
Hi, great to be here.
So nice to have you. I've been looking forward to our conversation. We're talking in advance of a big event we're doing next week in Atlanta that you'll be part of. And we're going to be talking about a lot of the things we've been talking about in this series about making government work better, how government can get stuff done. And I'm really excited about the work you guys are doing. So maybe just to start with, why don't you tell us a little bit about Work for America and what you all do?
Sounds great. Work for America was founded to really help state and local governments find, hire, and retain the people who power public service. And it was really born out of the fact that in cities across the country, many leaders have been facing a staffing crisis for several years, but especially post-COVID. Government's been experiencing some of the broader labor market trends of boomers retiring and exiting the workforce en masse. But for government, the workforce skews way older, and there are far fewer young people going into it. So we've seen in communities across the country, really the basics starting to fall apart as there aren't enough people to fill critical roles that serve communities. And that manifests in any number of ways, whether it's quite literally 911 calls going unanswered. And we've seen examples of that in dozens of cities across the country over the past couple of years. Or it's some of the kind of nerdier, more behind the scenes issues like cities having their credit downgraded because of a lack of accounting and finance staff. And we've seen 63 cities last year actually have their credit downgraded. And the rating agency specifically cited staffing as a challenge. This leads to cities paying higher interest rates on their debt. They can't issue bond deals. We saw that happen in Marion, Ohio. They couldn't issue a bond deal to build a new firehouse. And these really just have ripple effects across communities that impact citizens and our families and our neighbors, and really cause people to lose faith in government's ability to provide for them. And so that is so much of what motivated the founding of Work for America, the work that we do. We work directly with state and local governments to really help them increase their capacity to recruit and retain talent. We do that in a number of ways. I'm happy to dig into it more, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, I want to just thank you for all that work you're doing. And I want to dig in on one thing you said, which is you kind of made the connection, which I absolutely agree with, which is about you didn't use the word democracies, but I'll put it in there, of essentially our democracy, really the health of our democracy, nothing less than the health of our democracy, really relying on the fact that people think government can work and can deliver. And so when it doesn't, that really just goes into this whole spiral about democracy generally. So I wanted to put an emphasis on that point. You were kind of making a little bit, but maybe you can talk, there's so much to talk about, and you've got this really great thing called Civic Match I want to get into. I want to talk about DOGE and what's happening at the federal level, what that means for states and localities. But you talked a little bit about kind of the more general labor market trends, and specifically the fact that state and local governments had largely been staffed by older folks, so generational change. Are there any other just barriers to public service that you would point to in terms of what keeps, kind of this crisis? You've called it a crisis, and so I want to underscore that too. What kind of keeps this crisis going, and then let's talk about how we can fix it too.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I would point to is the fact that government just really has a PR problem. Yeah. Unlike the private sector and really even the military, state and local governments, government writ large, doesn't really think about its brand and doesn't think about recruitment like a chief marketing officer would. So in general, public servants have been branded as bureaucratic and boring and broken. And we've really spent decades positioning the military as a noble path, elevating tech careers as aspirational and entrepreneurial, and leaving public service completely out of the national imagination. And I don't just mean we need to have a big marketing campaign to talk about how great public service is, though that is something that should happen, but it manifests in little ways. State and local governments don't really think about job narratives in a compelling way, and often post job descriptions that use jargon and numbers and are coded and difficult to understand, which is a barrier for folks who are maybe curious in government work, but not curious enough to sift through a confusing job narrative. They don't advertise open roles in the way that other sectors do, and where governments have actually done advertising campaigns for open roles, it's been really successful, but it's not common. I think in general, marketing and communications is scary in government because it's sometimes hard to measure the return on investment for marketing dollars spent. And because you're managing taxpayer dollars and scrutiny is so high on everything that you do in government, there's a real reticence to invest in brand, but it's so incredibly important. And I think we are in a very delicate moment for public service, to say the least. And a big part of that is kind of the culmination of a lack of investment in really branding and marketing the meaning making of government roles.
Yeah, well, and I here to all that. Of course, this podcast is called An Honorable Profession in spirit of the fact that we think government service, whether it's elected, who we work mostly with, or in the staff capacity, is an honorable profession. I could not agree more. And I think I actually think there's a long-term strategy that's needed. I've talked to a couple people. I wrote a piece for the Democracy Journal about this, about elected officials and kind of the way it's perceived by people, right? And even in our popular culture, like there's a Taylor Swift song that talks about kind of congressmen and their narcissism. And I mean, just it's just almost like insidious in the way that it's not intentional, but it's that it's just kind of taken as a fact that the public servants or government is somehow less than at best, or corrupt or worse. And then of course we've got messages coming out of Washington with Elon Musk and DOGE, which is really doubling down on that feeling that somehow this bureaucracy that needs to be cut is, because it's bloated and not delivering or whatever it is. There is a silver lining potentially here that, I think that we are getting a big civics lesson. You talked a little bit about some of the functions that cities perform that I think most people want to have performed, like your 911 calls being answered. And I think some of what's happening with DOGE is shining a spotlight on the different critical role the government plays, in everything from nuclear inspectors to FAA controllers, across the board. But are you seeing a shift at all, either to or from public service, given the moment that we're in right now, and this kind of attack, if you will, on the whole notion of serving?
Definitely. I think there's a lot that is pretty chaotic and confusing and difficult about the moment we're living through, especially for those of us who have spent our careers believing in and working to make government better. But there's also a lot of bright spots that we can hold on to, and our team tries to operate from a place of optimism to the extent we can. And the program that we're running right now, Civic Match, is helping to connect outgoing federal workers with jobs in state and local government. And we actually just surveyed our candidate pool. At the time we did the survey, we had over 5,000 candidates using Civic Match. Today, it's nearly 9,000, which is mind-blowing, and a very bittersweet marker every time we hit one of those milestones. But when we surveyed the candidates, more than half of them are very certain or very likely to go into state or local government as their next career move. And that number goes up to 74% for early career professionals, so folks with just 1 to 3 years of experience. I think that is a very hopeful number, that young people who entered the federal government as kind of the first stop in their career and have had this kind of chaotic, confusing termination of their role take place are still very motivated to work in local government. We also asked, with all that's happening in DC, whether folks are either more likely or less likely now to go into local government than they were before. And 76% of all respondents said they're more likely today to go into local government than they were pre-January 20th. And only 6% said they're less likely. So granted, this is a specific pool of respondents who already work for the federal government, so they understand what's great about public service. But I think on the job seeker side, we're seeing that the commitment is stronger than ever, and folks are willing to relocate. They're willing to consider a lower salary in exchange for a great stable career in a local government, and they're more committed than ever. I also think on the state and local government leadership side, we have really seen leaders step up. We have seen governors and mayors across the country who understand, kind of broadly speaking, that this is the moment for state and local leadership to really lead the charge as the size and scope of the federal government decreases. But they are bending over backwards to recruit this talent to their cities because they know that folks with expertise in grant making, procurement, federal contracts are the folks that they need to fill these critical roles, some of the ones I referenced earlier in their state and local governments. And I think that proactive energy and excitement and desire to recruit the outgoing federal workers on the part of city and state leaders has been really inspiring, and definitely gives me hope that we're going to be okay at the state and local level, even if things can feel a little crazy at the federal level.
Yeah. And how about, obviously state and localities rely on tax revenue, which in these economic times is uncertain. There's some, talk about or concern about federal government clawing from some of the federal funds that flow to states and localities back. So how are states, I love the fact that what I think I hear you saying is that there's been this need for a long time. And now there is this opportunity to try to funnel some of the federal people who are being laid off, who have expertise, who have want to stay in these careers into those jobs, which is great. But are you worried at all about kind of the ability for states and localities to hire going forward, just given the economic times, and what does that look like?
Yeah, I would be lying if I said there are not clouds on the horizon. And we talk to state and local leaders about this all the time. Folks are absolutely looking at their budget projections and their reliance on federal funding and figuring out kind of what their risk exposure is in a moment in which money that has been certain from the federal government may no longer be so certain. So we've seen cities that are on hiring freezes. Many are on a hiring freeze through the end of this budget cycle. So we're looking at lifting the hiring freeze come July, August of this year. But we're certainly navigating uncharted waters. I think the reality is that state and local governments have to keep moving. And even in the worst of budget crises, they're still going to require a workforce, and they're still going to have to fill critical roles and critical vacancies to be able to deliver on behalf of their communities. And so we're not going to be able to place every single outgoing federal worker in a local government job. I am not going to pretend that that's something we're able to achieve, especially in places, Kansas City is a great example of a city where the mayor has been very out front recruiting federal workers. He just hired a Civic Match candidate in an auditor role in the city. But they had 1,000 IRS workers laid off in Kansas City in one day. And even if they wanted to find a role for all of those people, in the rosiest of times, they can't hire 1,000 IRS employees in local government in Kansas City. So there's real, especially kind of regional economic impact and ripple effects that we're going to see play out here. I think we're just starting to wrap our heads around what the totality of the impacts of DOGE layoffs is going to be. But cities and states are ready to meet the moment. I feel very confident about that. And it doesn't mean things are going to be seamless or perfect, but it means that we have leaders who are ready to lead the charge. Yeah, absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that the mayor of Kansas City, Quentin Lucas, is also a New Deal leader. So we know him well. He is. He's everywhere. But I think that's a really important point you're making about not just the federal workers thinking about moving people from Washington to the cities and states, but actually federal workers are being laid off all over the country, actually. And so finding the great roles for them or making those matches. Maybe you can talk a little bit about exactly how Civic Match works and what kind of success you've been seeing so far. Yeah, so Civic Match is a nonpartisan talent matching platform that helps connect outgoing federal workers directly to hiring managers in state and local governments. So the way that it works, it's free to use for both job seekers and for state and local governments. And job seekers can go to civicmatch.org, fill out an application, which has general information about where they live, where they want to live, their work experience. They can upload their resume, and then they're entered into a database that state and local government hiring managers have a unique login and access to. So they can actually go in on the back end and filter through the candidates based on geography and the exact roles that they're hiring for. And then they can interact with candidates directly through the platform to invite them to formally apply for the jobs, to reach out and set up a screening interview, et cetera. We also have a public jobs board, which anyone can go and take a look at. And we have hundreds of jobs posted on that jobs board. The thing to note is that it's not just a scraping function where we're putting a bunch of job listings up on our website. Every single one of those jobs has a real hiring manager behind it, actively using the Civic Match platform. We're working at this point with over 500 active hiring managers who are spread across more than 190 cities and 47 states. So the scope is not just geographically large in terms of where candidates are located, because they are living in all 50 states, but also where the roles are available. And then the last thing I'll add is the platform is simple and intuitive and easy to use, but we also host events to actually connect candidates and hiring managers. So we have an event series called Civic Match Live. It's actually very heartwarming because we start the events by having every hiring manager just pitch their city or state for 90 seconds. And it's really an exercise in being able to say what's so great about the place where you live and work. And so we have people getting into heated debates about whose barbecue is best and where the best sunsets are. And then, of course, talking about benefits and the stability and the meaning making of working in government. So it's a very great way to just remember what's so amazing about state and local government in a time like this. And then candidates and hiring managers get to go into breakout rooms and actually meet one another for the second half of the event. And somewhere around 40% of Civic Match hires that we've made were folks who actually met the hiring manager at a Civic Match live event. Wow. So we've seen it be extremely high impact. And so we love continuing to do that and to be able to connect folks in a slightly more real life setting, though still virtual. I love that. Well, for all the state and local leaders who listen to this podcast, they should make sure that they're on Civic Match. Their hiring managers are on Civic Match. It sounds like a really great way to meet folks. I mean, one thing I'm seeing from the elected official side, and I was heartened by what you said about your study or your report on federal workers say they want to stay in service, and people ask, I get the question all the time, like, are you seeing a drop off of people wanting to run for office? And, I have to say so far, I feel like
it's actually had the opposite effect. I feel like there's a lot of people who are stepping up to say, you know what, not despite of what's happening, but because of what's happening, I'm feeling called to serve. I'm feeling called, like this is, a little bit after a lot of the military got that big jump after 9/11. People felt like there was really, this is their time, as you were saying, this is our moment to do something and to get involved. And so I'm hopeful that there's a real, renaissance around service, right? And because we are shining such a light on it, right? And you do realize that, people are doing these important tasks that, we all rely on as a society, as a community. And so, when you're hearing people, you were talking about the hiring managers talk about their cities and states and pitching where they live, but I suspect you're also hearing from the job seekers themselves too about why they want to serve. I mean, are you hearing the same type of thing from people looking for public service jobs?
Absolutely. I think, again, to the extent we can find bright spots in a moment of chaos and confusion, that is certainly one of them. I mean, I worked in government. It's hard. I love to run around and tell people how amazing it is, because it is. It is creative, entrepreneurial, fast-moving work. I had the time of my life, even on the worst of days, of which there are many when you work in a place like New York City Hall, which is where I started my public sector career in New York. But folks work in government because of the challenge and because it is so difficult to address these truly systemic challenges, adaptive challenges, problems that we're never going to be able to solve outright, but that through a career of pushing a boulder up the hill, you can impact in a positive direction. And so it is no surprise at all to me that in a moment of real need for the public sector, folks who have committed their careers to this work would be stepping up and kind of doubling down on their commitment to doing so. And I think for many folks, the opportunity to do that at the local level is more appealing than ever, not just because they may have lost their job in the federal government or the kind of future of the federal government is uncertain, but because in cities across the country, we are seeing IRA-funded infrastructure projects actually turn into kind of shovels in the ground initiatives in communities. And for folks who spent the last 4 years in the federal government designing and launching these programs, there's actually no better next step than to move home and make sure that that bridge that you funded while you were at DOT actually gets built in your hometown and for your community. And so we've been really energized to see folks who have kind of taken that perspective of this is actually a chance for me to give back to my home community after spending my career working in DC or at the federal level.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point. You mentioned your work in City Hall, so maybe talk a little bit about how you came to this work, maybe public service generally, given our conversation, not just the specific organization, but why did you go to work at City Hall in the first place? What spoke to you?
Yeah, I'm a government nerd. I'm a civically engaged citizen, kind of baked into my DNA or by design. I grew up in California, not far from where you live now. And my dad was a forest firefighter and a youth prison counselor when I was growing up. But he was also just always there for me in my day-to-day life. He was the chef at my preschool. He coached all of my soccer teams and basketball teams. And my mom was similar. She was the president of the local Rotary Club, involved in the Chamber of Commerce. So I just grew up really wanting to be where I could see my impact and to really be in and of community. And I ended up moving to New York City after graduating from college. I did the classic no job nannying circuit, living on a couch while I figured out what I wanted to do. And in part, that was because I saw so many of my classmates go into finance and consulting post-graduation without really even thinking about it. And I knew that I didn't want to do that, but I didn't really know what else there was out there for me. There were clear pathways when I was thinking about my post-college career moves. And so landed in New York City, ended up in this incredible job at the Times Square Alliance, the organization that manages Times Square and covers everything from how do you manage trash pickup in a neighborhood that 500,000 people walk through in a given day to how do you throw a party for 1 million people on New Year's Eve and planning the ball drop. And so unsurprisingly, the answer is deep partnership with government. And a big part of my job was managing our various partnerships with the Department of Transportation, the police department, City Hall, and really working directly with the city to make this very complicated, crazy neighborhood work. So I really wanted to work in city government after that experience. I really enjoyed working with folks on the city side. And I went to be Deputy Chief of Staff for Housing and Economic Development in the de Blasio administration in New York City, and just had the absolute time of my life. I got to work on incredible projects like overseeing the vision for a $700 million climate campus on Governor's Island, which is sort of the last undeveloped swath of land in all of the 5 boroughs.
Wow.
Overseeing some neighborhood-wide rezonings like the East Midtown commercial rezoning in the East Midtown neighborhood of Manhattan. For a while, I oversaw the city's arts and culture portfolio, which is just, bar none, getting to think about arts and culture from the perspective of Staten Island all the way to MoMA and the Met. And I also just saw really firsthand how when you do have the right people in the right roles, government can do a lot. We passed a massive housing affordability plan, implemented universal pre-K, and were able to truly move mountains in the early de Blasio administration. And I also just saw what happens when you don't have the right people in the right roles. And when you're unable to staff certain parts of government, the basics just fall apart. So that is what really motivated where I am today, which is having had the absolute time of my life in government, seeing the impact of my work on literally millions of New Yorkers, getting to walk down the streets of New York City and see projects that I worked on is just a pinch yourself moment every time. But government is in need of help and people and process change, and the opportunity to do that at a kind of broader scale was really appealing. Though I definitely know at some point I will have another stint in the public sector.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think that you alluded to this in some of what you said, and I do love that pinch me moment. I can. It is so rewarding, right, to see those things that you worked on that you were passionate about come to fruition, and then be able and to know you're impacting so many people. And so I think that that's just such a special thing. And so, one of the other things that I'm sure is going to come out of this moment in time is that, we're never going back to how things were. The one thing that will happen with all of this chaos and disruption, which I would argue is not done in any kind of good way, will have, ramifications for a really long time, but it will allow us to come back with something even stronger, hopefully, right? And it has opened up a conversation, let's say, around the size and scope and responsibility and how we deliver government services. And so I guess I wonder from your perspective, you mentioned kind of that fact that you were graduating college, and this was not what people were thinking they were going to do. They were going to go to finance or go to Wall Street or whatever it was. How do we match this moment that is going to be very exciting and in the sense of, we need entrepreneurial thinkers. We need people who can think about how we deliver services better, how we use technology to improve government services. There's going to be so many of those conversations happening. How do you think we get people coming out of college specifically to get more excited about going into these roles?
I would argue that they're already excited. They just don't know where to go. And I found that a lot as an undergrad, and I get outreach every single day on LinkedIn and in my inbox from folks who are seniors in college wondering if they're eligible for Civic Match and can use the platform to find state and local jobs. I think that is the largest talent pool that is outside of our eligible talent pool that we have tapped into with Civic Match, which is creating a kind of unified place where you can go and see state and local jobs across the country. And I think, again, it gets back to recruitment channels and marketing of these roles and actually making these jobs accessible to more people. I think that folks graduating from college today are more mission motivated than ever before. In surveys of Gen Z college students graduating from last year, the 2 most important factors were sense of mission and purpose and stability. The kids of today went to high school during COVID. They're going through college in this time of incredible turmoil, and they just want to be able to do something good and know that they have a little bit of security and stability when doing it. And so government has all of the things that they're seeking, and it's a matter of just getting the roles in front of these students, and in part, being able to hire on a timeline that makes sense for kids coming out of college. And part of what gives finance and consulting an edge is their ability to hire a cohort of students in October who get to start in June. And they make the timelines really attractive for those who are, again, just looking for some kind of sense of stability and an idea of what they're going to be doing when they graduate. So long way of saying, I think the energy is there. I think we're feeling it now more than ever. People really want to do good, meaningful work. It's just a matter of reaching them.
Yeah. Well, and maybe flipping the question on its head a little bit, is someone who works with state and local elected officials and who I know are a large part of our audience for this podcast. What advice do you have for them in reaching those people? You've talked about marketing a little bit. You've talked about, I think that's a really interesting, you just say, think about timelines, if there's a way to think about timelines better. What other tips do you have for people who are trying to recruit and then eventually retain these great young workers?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things you can do is just form either formal or informal partnerships with local high schools, community colleges, and universities. It's a great way to reach students, is where they are. You have to start recruiting early to be able to capture them. And so finding ways to, whether it's do a lunch and learn at a community college or join a career fair or recruitment event, it really does matter to be able to go meet people where they are and explain to them why it's so great to work for your office or to work for the public sector. And then for larger institutions, universities that have career centers or internship programs where they may pay to send a student to your office for the summer, make sure that you're just aware of and taking advantage of those things in your community, because it's not just a great opportunity to have a funded intern for the summer, but to develop a young person who may want to actually step into a career in your office or in public service longer term. So I think that's a great place to start. The other thing that's huge is just making sure that you and everyone you work for can clearly express the value proposition of doing what you do. It seems very simple, but as I said with our Civic Match live events, the folks who can give the tightest, most compelling 1-minute pitch are the folks who have the largest breakout rooms. It doesn't matter if they're located across the country from where someone thought they might want to work. The ability to say, this is why I do what I do, this is why it's great to do it here, here's how you can do it too, is bar none the most compelling way to bring people on board. And it's a very simple thing to think about and talk through with your team and really kind of refine to make sure everyone can give that pitch.
Yeah, I love that. As we're wrapping up, maybe I'm going to ask you two final questions. One is, if you're thinking about, you're talking to folks, you've got a really good, feel for the pulse of where we're headed with all of this uncertainty. So if you're worried, what's the one thing maybe that you're worried most about in the sense of kind of government being able to deliver what it needs to deliver at the state and local level as it relates to kind of staff?
I think speed and the ability to move quickly. I was talking to someone last week who spent his career in civic tech and government innovation, and we were talking about what's happening with DOGE and the federal government. And he said something that I cannot get out of my head, which is that he has a kind of perverse sense of jealousy at how fast they've been able to move with such little regard for the rules. And for those of us who have spent our careers trying to make government better and accepting slow and incremental change as sort of the reality, it is actually like kind of crazy to see how quickly they've been able to just blow everything up. And when we think about sort of state and local government's ability to meet the moment, I think speed, sort of matching the scale and speed at which things are sort of unraveling at the federal level, is going to be critical to being able to meet the moment. And so whether that's systematically looking at hiring processes and being able to fast track and do it quicker, or really thinking about how we deliver on the local level, which is a more kind of existential question, I think it's going to be necessary to really meet this moment and show that government can work even when it feels like things are kind of falling apart.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's been great to have people like Jen Paulka on this podcast talking about some of those, disruptive ways of thinking that we need to adopt to be able to say, look, this is a warning shot a little bit, right? I think that they've overstepped there. It's much easier to tear something down than to build it up. We know all of that, but at the same time, there is a lesson here about the people are rightfully fed up with some of the things that weren't working, and instead of defending those, we need to fix them, frankly. And so I think that that's really job number one for us. So to the extent that means thinking about how you're hiring, having the right people in the right seats on the right bus, right? To use that analogy is super important. And you talked a little bit about throughout your answers about kind of your hope, but what is your greatest hope about this moment, or how we emerge from all of this?
My hope is that it's an opportunity to solve some of the challenges state and local governments have been grappling with for years. My sort of vision for the impact of Civic Match is that we have hundreds of federal workers who found jobs through the Civic Match platform working in communities across the country, which will create an incredible network effect of folks who are committed to public service, who are transitioning from the federal to the local level, and who are kind of doubling down on their commitment to serve. I look forward to the first time we can have a summit with all of our Civic Match leaders who have been working for a year in state or local government and can really shed a light on what it means to make that transition and to serve at the local level. And so I'm extremely excited about, quite frankly, the sort of research and data that we're going to be able to do as an organization that will hopefully shed light on this population of job seekers, folks who are committed to public service, and what is needed to really be able to move forward.
Yeah, well, I look forward to working with you to lift up some of those success stories of, how people are getting in there and changing the way government works and delivers for their constituents. So very excited to partner with you. Happy to have you coming to join us in Atlanta next week to talk more about all the work you're doing. Thank you so much for being here and for all the work you're doing to make sure that we've got great people working and delivering at the state and local level.
Same to you. Thank you for having me, and very, very excited to be in person together next week.
See you soon.
An Honorable Profession is a New Deal Leaders podcast. Thanks to the team at New Deal for producing this episode. We encourage you to bring honor to public service, and because we keep things honorable, no tax dollars are used in the making of this podcast.
This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.